I'm Ali Asadullah, a freelance writer and journalist here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Since September 11th, the public has been inundated with information about Islam and Muslims. Many Americans are confused about who Muslims are and what their religion, Islam, actually teaches them. In this program, we hope to go beyond the front page headlines and radio sound bites to learn what is really going on in the minds of American Muslims. We will talk with 7 Muslims from around the Bay Area. They are from various walks of life, different cultures, backgrounds, and ages, but they all have one thing in common. They are all American Muslims. Muslims comprise many nationalities and cultures, ranging from African, Asian, Middle Eastern, Arab, European, and also American. Drive through any major U.S. city, and you are sure to find many Islamic centers, schools, and mosques scattered throughout the landscape. Close to 40% of all Muslims in America are of African American descent. One of our first interviewees is Nayama Bayton, an African American convert who has been Muslim for about 25 years. Nayama is a community development consultant in the city of Oakland. We asked her about her initial reaction after the news of the terrorist attacks on September 11th.
It was hard to believe that it was actually happening, and I just felt a state of just personal loss, because I immediately started thinking about how many thousands of people work in that building, and it was very, very frightening for that reason. I think that it was more a sense of disbelief than anything else.
We also talked to Adil Iqbal, a 16-year-old Pakistani-American Muslim who was a junior in high school, to get his reaction to the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon.
We woke up and we turned on the TV, and there was, like, on every channel there was smoke and these buildings and these airplanes and whatever. They were all on TV, and I was like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. I can't believe that happened, and I just hoped there was no mention of a Muslim name, Arab name, or whatever. Someone saying that Muslims or Arabs did this, and it turned out that in a couple of hours that happened.
Many Arabs and Muslims had hoped that the blame for the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon would not fall on them, as it mistakenly did when the Murrah Federal Building was bombed in Oklahoma City in 1996. But unlike Oklahoma City, the perpetrators of the latest act of terror appear to actually have been Arabs and Muslims. The suspected mastermind of the September 11th attacks, Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda network, based in Afghanistan. The city of Fremont is home to the largest Afghan population in the United States. Another one of our interviewees is Farid Senzai, an Afghan American who is studying political science at Oxford University. We asked Farid how he felt about the news of the terrorist attacks.
So as an American, I was, of course, terrified that such an act could happen in New York City. But as a Muslim, I was fearful and a bit of scared of what the backlash could potentially be for Muslims living in this country. I know in the past, when these sort of incidents happen, right away there is an assumption that the perpetrators are Muslim or Middle Eastern, and in this case I felt that if the media jump to that conclusion right away, there would be a backlash against the Muslim community in this country.
We also spoke with Shireen Sinar, a second-year law student at Stanford University, to get her opinion on the media's coverage of the attacks.
I think, frankly, the news media reporting of these events is pretty awful, and it depends on the source. Some sources, especially print media, I don't think is quite as bad, even though there too there are a lot of problems. But especially like TV coverage on Fox News and CNN has been really sensational and misleading. And not just that, I think they take it as their purpose to almost serve as a voice for the American government, which is really, really disturbing, that you expect your news media to be objective and to look behind what's going on, especially at a time when there is such a danger of just being rah-rah-rah American chauvinist. And rather than providing an objective counter to the party line, I think they are really contributing to it and just playing it up. And that's really disturbing when an institution you expect to be the critical voice is just trumpeting a line that you are hearing from other sources. And this is particularly with regard to the war in Afghanistan, how there's almost no voice of objection or criticism or even just questioning, is this the right course to do? It's also true with the attack on civil liberties in the US, that the news media seems to think as a whole that anything is okay in a time of emergency, and they're not looking twice and seeing what's really happening.
Adil Iqbal is part of a Muslim youth think tank, and one of his responsibilities is to monitor the media and its portrayal of Islam and Muslims.
Muslims have been defamed. For example, if you just look at the first day of the attacks, there was a tape of Palestinian people cheering in the streets, yet that was just a small amount of the actual entire Palestinian people who had vigils and prayers for those that died. But the American media shows this small group representing the entire Palestinian population. And what does that tell the American public? It tells them that Muslims like seeing dead people, like seeing terror acts. And when people in America see things on TV, see the news reporting it, they're going to believe it. And that just has a negative impact on Islam as a whole, and especially on the American Muslims, because the American people are the ones seeing it on TV and having Muslim people around them.
We spoke to a man, Faraj Allah, a Palestinian American who started a helpline for victims of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hate crimes after the September 11th attacks.
The reporting was very, very unfair towards Muslims, and unfortunately, it's all what you could see is what is really happening in ground zero. At the same time, all what you can hear is Muslims, Islam, and Arabs and Palestinians. And I think the media really played a major role in increasing the hate crimes against Muslims and Arabs in the Bay Area, as well as all over the United States. I think, especially the big outlets, they were really very unobjective in their broadcasting. And that continues like for 3-4 days, and I think until they did not stop doing that until President Bush came out and said that you cannot victimize Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, and they are citizens like as everybody else. And until he stepped into and went and visited the mosque in Washington D.C., until that minute, the media was like targeting basically Muslims and Arabs.
How did it make you feel to hear many people were targeted for retaliation because of their skin color and the way they dress?
I think about it. I think it's an awful experience that I don't wish for nobody to go through it, whether Muslim or Arab or Palestinian or any human being. It's an awful experience to be targeted because of your religion. It's an awful experience to be targeted because of the way you dress, or to be targeted because of your color. I think it's a very awful experience where you have to get into the point that you have to pay your life as a cost of your race or religion that you carry.
Even non-Muslims and non-Arabs were targeted for hate crimes simply because they happen to look different or have an accent. Many people have likened these events to what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II after Pearl Harbor was attacked.
This country had gotten over the kind of fear and hostility that led to the Japanese internment camps during World War II. Unfortunately, I don't think that that this country has really gotten over that kind of response. And I was very frightened when, as soon as I heard that Muslims and Arabs were possibly implicated in this, I was very, very frightened that it would just literally pull the hoods off of, so to speak, the racism in this country.
U.S. airports have been using racial profiling for suspected hijackers for several years. But since September 11th, there has been a heightened sense of security that has resulted in an increased screening of Arab, Muslim, and Middle Eastern-looking passengers. How do you feel about that? And do you think it is appropriate during these times, or is such profiling far too great an abuse of civil liberties?
I definitely think that racial profiling is an abuse of civil liberties. It's a very, very bad thing in this country. I think that here in the 20th century, we should have come much, much further than looking at someone and making an assumption that this person's bad because of how they look, or this person's bad because they have a certain kind of accent, or that this person is incapable of this job simply because they have a handicap or some disability that is visible.
We asked Shireen Sinar, who is paying close attention to issues related to Arab and Muslim civil liberties, what she thought about the airline's use of racial profiling.
I think the government should be doing things which generally maybe subject people to more checks at an airport. I don't like the fact that it's doing it specifically for certain people with certain last names, certain facial colors, certain ethnic identities. I think that's wrong. I think the majority of the American population doesn't feel that it's it could be interrogated, and so it just doesn't think it's a big deal. It's fine for us, for Americans, to feel that they can sacrifice someone else's civil liberties.
The fact that the terrorists who hijacked and flew the airliners into the World Trade Center and Pentagon were Arabs who followed the religion of Islam has engendered in many the false impression that Islam is a violent religion that condones these acts of terrorism. Furthering this perception is the small but vocal number of Muslims who consider these suicide bombers martyrs. We asked a local Muslim leader, or imam, what he thought about suicide bombing and the idea of martyrdom in Islam. Imam Tahir Anwar was raised in San Jose, California, but studied to become a hafiz, one who memorizes the Holy Quran, at an Islamic madrasa or university in India. He is now the religious director of the South Bay Islamic Association in San Jose.
It needs to be clarified very much. Suicide is haram in Islam. Under no circumstances can anyone make it correct. We need to understand what actually a shaheed is. Who is a person who actually enters paradise, or who is a person who is considered to be a martyr? For example, in our situation, a person who's hijacked a plane and who's running it into the Twin Towers, from what we understand, he's considered to be doing a suicide, and at the same time he's taking the lives of thousands of people. So from what we have learned from the Quran and the Hadith, he is not considered to be a shaheed or a martyr by any chance. A person who is considered to be a shaheed or a martyr, though, is, for example, a person, let's just take for example me, walking down the road to the mosque, and if I were to be attacked, not because of any other reason, if I were to be attacked because of me being a Muslim, or me wearing a cap or having a beard, then maybe because someone might do something harmful to me, and if I were to die, in that situation I would be considered to be a shaheed because I truly gave my life because of my religion and nothing else. But in the situation, in the current crisis and scenario that we have here, it's total suicide, and it can't. That person and those persons, whoever they were, cannot be considered to be shaheed or martyrs.
These terrorists obviously had a different way of thinking about martyrdom. The United States government believes that they were brainwashed and trained by Osama bin Laden, a person who was vowed to kill as many Americans as possible. This raises the question of why some Muslims would choose to follow the teachings of such an individual. We asked Adil Iqbal why he thinks Osama bin Laden is so popular among Muslim youth in countries such as Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
Osama bin Laden is really popular in the countries that you mentioned, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, etc., because of what the people in those countries think of America. America has a negative foreign policy towards Muslim countries, Iraq, Palestine, Pakistan. For example, if we look at how America has handled Iraq right now, want to blow up things, they just don't like what America is doing to them.
Why do many Americans have the perception that there is so much hate for the United States in the Muslim world? Dr. Hamid Mavani is the religious director of the Islamic Cultural Center in Oakland, California. We asked him to shed some light on this issue.
Because certain factors contribute to this culture of hate against America and the West. One of them is a sense of inequity. They perceive, whether it is true or not, but their perception is that the American policy has not been fair and just in handling their grievances. And this was clearly exploited by bin Laden in this recent video that was released by the Al Jazeera news television program, in which he called out the people to empathize with the plight of the Palestinians, to empathize with the plight of the innocent Iraqis, children and men and women who are suffering as a result of the economic sanctions imposed upon them more than a decade ago.
Like Dr. Mavani, Farid also believes that U.S. foreign policy is the major factor in the growth of anti-American sentiment and violence in the Middle East.
One of the problems which we often see is when we look at this conflict, we often assume that they hate us because of our freedoms or they hate our way of life. That is not, in fact, the correct way to look at this. It's not that they hate our freedoms, it's not that they hate what we stand for. They would love nothing more than to have some of the same freedoms which we enjoy here. What in fact is at the core of many of these problems is our foreign policy. There was an article that was written a few weeks ago in which it stated very bluntly, it's our foreign policy, stupid. And I think that it almost needs to be that blunt for many people to understand that some of the problems that occur in other countries and the grievances that many have around the world are a direct result of our foreign policy. We need to be aware of that if we are to eliminate terrorism in the future.
Many Muslims feel that for all the death and destruction that the United States has caused in Iraq through sanctions and indirectly through support of Israeli occupation in Palestine, that it is okay for Muslims to fight back with violence. We asked Imam Tahir to clarify the Islamic teachings on retribution.
So if someone does any harm to you, you do have the right to do justice to them. But prior to that, even before that, if we take a little step back, we will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in various places in the Quran teaches us that we should forgive those people. And if we look at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if we look at the books of hadith, we will find various stories in which when the enemy did harm to the Muslims or to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, he always went back and he never did anything to them. He always forgave them.
This example of how the Prophet Muhammad dealt with his enemies seems to be in stark contrast with the way in which Osama bin Laden has chosen to deal with his. This interpretation has led bin Laden to declare jihad, or holy war, against America and the West. The word jihad has been used a lot lately. Most people understand it as holy war, but the literal translation from Arabic is to strive or struggle. We asked Dr. Mavani to help us clarify the actual meaning of the word jihad.
A case in point about the misconception has to do with the concept of jihad. Generally in the media, this concept has been mistranslated as holy war. If one were to translate this term holy war to Arabic, it would be al-harb al-muqaddasa. Jihad in the Islamic understanding etymologically means any effort, any human striving, any struggle that is done for a noble cause through lawful and legitimate means. First and foremost, the primary jihad is the struggle against one's own individual self, against the base desires, against greed, against lust, against any kind of tendencies which are improper. So the primary struggle in Islam, known as Jihad Akbar, has to do with struggle against one's own evil inclinations. Only one minor component of that struggle could actualize in the form of military combat. And even for that to be actualized, there are certain preset conditions that have to be fulfilled. So the call of bin Laden, calling the Muslims to join him in this battle of holy war, is totally, he doesn't have any foundation in the classical literature, and nor does he have any foundation in the Quranic scripture either.
We asked Imam Tahir to explain the rules of war in Islam, and what he said was surprising.
For example, if you were to be at war, you could not harm the women, the children, the older people, even the religious people, the priests, etc. And and if you're fighting in a foreign land, you cannot destroy their property, their churches, synagogues, any kind of religious building or any other kind of building. And if there were to be any farmland, you could not uproot that farmland either.
Naturally, there is some distrust on the part of American Muslims with reference to how their government is waging this war on terrorism. Many Muslims feel that a military approach will not solve the problem of terrorism.
It is very rare that I believe that a military option will solve the problems. In terms of terrorism, I think we quite frankly have to look a lot closer to home. In the same way that when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, everybody was all up certain that the Muslims had done it. And it turns out that it was a homegrown American terrorist.
There's an old adage that when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And I think that's kind of the American approach, that they know how to drop bombs, cluster bombs from great distances onto people. So let's try that. And that's kind of, I think, what seems to be happening in Afghanistan. And I think the approach is almost like, well, we have to do something. And that seems to be the justification for a lot of what the U.S. government is doing, whether it's the war in Afghanistan or the new anti-terrorism laws and sort of the efforts at home. It just seems that because there's such an impetus to do something, people aren't really questioning whether that something is going to be effective. And no one is asking really deeper questions about why hate exists.
So answering the question why is very important, and we need to discuss it, we need to debate it, we need to talk about it in this country. It is not unpatriotic to discuss these issues. In fact, it is very American to discuss these issues. Well, that's what a democracy is all about, to talk about and discuss these issues. We should not go in blindly in a way which would not only kill innocent civilians, but may, in fact, exacerbate the situation and cause future terrorist acts to occur. So if our ultimate goal is to eliminate terrorism, we have to answer the question why, and that will, in the long run, eliminate terrorism. Afghanistan has been devastated by war, the refugee problem, the drought, malnutrition, lack of proper health. These are all issues which need to be addressed by the international community. The U.S., while they were supporting the Afghans in their fight against the Soviets, they packed their bags and left shortly thereafter in 1989. And so the country has been left to deal with its own issues, and unfortunately has broken down into civil war for the last 11 or 12 years. The Taliban came to the scene in 1996. They initially were madrasa or religious students that wanted to somehow bring some peace to the country, and gained tremendous support from Afghans in general who were tired of fighting and wanted to end the fighting. And so the Taliban received tremendous support, not only internally, but they also received international support from both Pakistan and, I would say, indirectly the U.S. Was supportive of the Taliban because they did not want the other groups to win.
The Taliban of Afghanistan were made up of the majority Pashtun ethnic group whose reach extends into western Pakistan. It is there that the Taliban learned their version of Islam in the region's Islamic madrasas or universities. Many people believe that these madrasas teach young Muslims to hate America and the West. We asked Imam Tahir, a former student of an Islamic madrasa, what he had to say about that.
The mentality of the people. Maybe there are some places in the world, various places, where because of their background and culture, they're going through so much and there's so much pain that the instructors have that pain, and when they come to class, there are times when they actually say things that might be effective or that might affect the students. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the traditional Islamic universities, even though the same thing is taught in those universities, but when a person comes out, he might come out with a different thinking. A person in India might come out with a different thinking than a person who has actually studied in Saudi Arabia. And the reason would be because it's, it's the mentality of the teachers, it's the culture around there. Many people feel that these are, they are not taught anything else except to go to war or except, what's in the books. Many of these universities have at the same time a lot of different courses. The students there are taught English, the students there are taught social studies, the students there are taught, various other things that they could do at the same time. And when the media is reporting back to us, they are lacking to report the other side of what's happening.
Obviously, the countries in which Muslim students live and the schools therein that they attend help determine their views on life and in turn the way they practice and interpret the religion of Islam.
I was saddened to see a particular ethnic group being predominantly involved in this particular catastrophe. But at the same time, we need to contextualize this in the larger picture, that in every tradition, there are always extremist elements who try to misuse certain aspects of religion to articulate their own political and ideological goals. And in this respect, it is quite clearly a political statement, a political vision, that certain groups are trying to misuse, in the process trying to misuse religious doctrines.
I think as in past situations when something like this has happened, when it appears that a Muslim group is responsible for an act of violence like that, it's particularly painful because you feel that something close to you, something that you care about deeply, your religion, your faith, is being misused. And it's almost easier when it's somebody else, and I think for a lot of Muslims, during that time, you hope that someone else ends up being responsible because it takes away that added pain of feeling that something that's so important and valuable to you is being twisted and misused, and that people's understanding of something you care about so deeply and that stands for so much beauty and good and tolerance and justice is being misappropriated by people who would misuse it for their own agendas.
Many Muslims are saying that what happened on September 11th had nothing to do with Islam and that the religion of Islam itself was hijacked by the terrorists. What then is Islam and what is it all about?
If I were going to tell America one thing about our religion, about Islam, it'd be that we're peaceful people. Our greeting to one another is Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. And that's what we're about, peace. Our religion, Islam, means peace. And if the American people want to know one thing about Islam, that's the one thing that'll tell them the truth about who we are.
I tried to be everything in this life. I tried to be a socialist. I tried to be communist. I tried to be atheist. I tried everything that exists on this face of earth. And I never felt as happy, neither as peaceful with myself as when I start to become a Muslim.
And in my experience, for example, in public office, people would try to get you to do things that they wanted you to do that were short-sighted or immoral or unethical, and I would always refuse. And I remember one time one of the other elected officials saying to me, "Can't you just go along with this just this one time?" And I said, "It's wrong. I can't do that. I answer to a higher authority than you." And he was visibly taken aback by that. But it had an impact on him. And after that, he never asked me to do anything unethical again.
We asked Imam Tahir what he thought Muslims can do to help change these negative images of Islam and Muslims, and how they can help to alleviate this mistrust between Muslims and non-Muslims in America.
We, as living in this country, we just have to meet our neighbors, meet our colleagues, and let them know who we are. Look, we are Muslims, and this is our religion, this is what we do, and this is what we don't do. We would have done this, many years ago, and it was just as possible as it is now many years ago. All the negative image that we as Muslims might be getting nowadays, we wouldn't have got, because those people truly would have, the people around us truly would have known who we are. Just because they don't know yet who we are, that's what's creating the conflict.
We have to be proud Muslims, and I don't think that we should fear as Muslim women to step outside and to defend who we are as Muslim women, that we chose this Islam, we chose this religion, and we chose to wear what we wanted to wear. And I think we need to educate the public. And if we still gonna all the time resist stepping outside and talking about our identity and who we are not to expect our neighbor to know who we are. If we're not going to go and say to our neighbor, hi, I think if we walk on the street and stay shameful, like because I'm wearing Muslim clothes, or then basically, I don't know how people look at me. Or if somebody asked me a question and said to me, why are you wearing this scarf? And I'm not willing to give the 5 minutes to explain why I'm wearing this scarf. I'm not going to expect a change within the community. Now, it's the Muslims' duty to educate the public about, Islam and who we are.
The biggest impact on me, though, was something that my halal butcher told me a few weeks ago. He said, as American Muslims, we have not done a good job at doing dawah or spreading information about this religion in America. And as a result, now Allah is sending people to us to ask us about Islam. Our task now is to rise to the occasion and be good dawiyas and give that information about Islam in a way that is easy for people to understand and is open.
What about Muslims in other countries where some say anti-American hate has grown? What can they do to help stop this cycle of hate from continuing?
For example, myself, even though I've been here for a very long time, since I was 5 years old, but when I do go back, I go back to tell them that, hey, look, we can practice our religion just as the way we want to. We can go to the mosque when we want to. We can dress how we like. So obviously these are things that they don't see on TV. All they see on TV is, things they don't like, things that are against their culture. They always see people who are talking against them or people who don't like them. We need to start with showing their good side to the people here. And the people there, they need to start seeing our good side, just as a lot of them get to see. I mean, we're not blaming anyone because we know both sides. Many others are not blaming anyone because they know that there is a bad and there is a good.
One of the primary litmus tests that the Prophet gave us, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said very clearly that whatever is in harmony with the Quranic principles, no matter what source it may be, needs to be embraced. And whatever is contradictory to the Quranic principles of peace, equity, justice, tolerance, compassion, whatever is contrary to those Quranic norms and principles need to be discarded. So I think we, as a Muslim nations and Muslim population, need to cultivate this on different fronts, at the school, at the center, at the Islamic centers, at the level of the political state. In all different fronts, we need to cultivate a message of universality, of being part and parcel of one humanity, and charting that course in trying to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also to try to be a good, sound, ethical human being.
I think through communication and a better education to our public and within the Muslim countries, within the Western countries, we can approach basically a better understanding of each other.
After September 11th, we all have a new sense of unity as a people. We can no longer take our freedoms and liberties for granted. How will this new war on terrorism affect how we treat our fellow Americans who may look, speak, or pray differently?
There has been a lot more awareness about Muslims and Islam in the last few weeks, which has been very good. The local churches, local synagogues have reached out to the Muslim community and have tried to introduce themselves, and it's been a very positive effect, I think, for the Muslims living in this country.
Gradually, as the hatred and the anger subsides, American public will reason with the issues and will come to terms that no particular ethnic group should be targeted or scapegoated.
The Quran also tells us that God made us in different nationalities and colors and types so that we could get to know each other, not hate each other. And so I think that as Muslims, because we are from all over the world, one of the things that we can help this country with is having that kind of recognition of sisterhood and brotherhood among all people, no matter where you're from. And because we have that, someone said one day that the pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, once a year is the biggest convention that happens in the world, the biggest annual convention. 2 million people in one place at one time, all with that single thought of one thing that they have to do. And so I think that kind of focus that we have, in spite of our diversity and maybe because of our diversity, is one of the things that we can bring to this country to help this country get over this basically immature fixation on people's differences.
To me, being an American is not an object, but a person. And I was born here, and I live here. I've lived here for 16 years. And that means something important to me because this is where I was born, this is where I'm from, this is where I plan to live, and this is where I'm going to carry out the message of Islam. And to me, that's something important because it's considered a foreign, non-Muslim country, but I consider it to be the country of my origin, the country where I can spread the true message of Islam.
Obviously, Muslims in America are here to stay, and according to many reports, Islam is the fastest growing religion in the United States. After studying more about Islam, I myself became Muslim in 1994. I feel it is important for Muslims in the United States to help educate their fellow Americans about Islam and to explain what it really stands for, which is peace and brotherhood of all peoples, no matter their race, ethnicity, or social status. Like the Imam said, we all have to make an effort to try to understand each other, and this is the only way we can start to end all the fear and hatred we may have between us. I hope this program was a start in the process of understanding between Islam and the West. Thanks for watching, and Assalamu Alaikum. Peace be with you.